In the spring of 485 BC, when the great halls of Persepolis shimmered under torchlight and the scent of cedar smoke drifted through the royal terraces, a curious silence lingered in the women's quarters of the Achaemenid palace. It was the night before the wedding of a young Persian princess, the daughter of King Darius I, and though the empire stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, dominating nearly half the known world, she sat trembling on embroidered cushions. Outside, nobles feasted, musicians played, and priests prepared the blessings of Ahura Mazda. Inside her chambers, however, the princess whispered prayers that her ancestors had once uttered in similar fear. History remembers the triumphs of the Persian Empire through its inscriptions, monuments, and military conquests, but few moments reveal its human cost as starkly as the quiet terror that shadowed the royal women on the eve of their wedding nights. To understand why Persian princesses feared this night, we must journey into the rituals, political pressures, and cultural expectations of an empire where marriage was never merely a union of two people. For the daughters of Persia's most powerful kings, marriage was a binding political instrument. Their bodies became signatures on treaties. Their sons could reshape the future of dynasties. Their loyalty could determine the balance between rebellion and allegiance among satraps. And most importantly, their marriages were often arranged long before they reached adulthood. While Persian culture allowed women more rights than many contemporary societies, royal daughters faced a unique vise of expectations that made their wedding nights unlike anything in common families. By the time the ceremonies approached, fear was not just emotional instinct, but a rational response to a system designed around power rather than personal choice. The roots of this fear stretched back generations. Under Cyrus the Great, the empire's earliest royal marriages were relatively moderate, often strategic, but still within the cultural boundaries set by ancient Persian traditions. But as the empire expanded under Cambyses Roman II, and especially under Darius I, diplomatic marriages became increasingly vital. Achaemenid kings wanted the loyalty of powerful satraps, allied tribes, and rival royal houses, and the easiest way to secure it was by giving a princess in marriage. A royal daughter thus became not a mere bride but a living treaty. She would be given to a noble whose loyalty needed strengthening, or to a foreign ruler whose cooperation during a campaign could alter the fate of entire provinces. This political value intensified the scrutiny placed upon these young women. Their virginity was considered an imperial asset, whose purity symbolized the legitimacy of their father's rule. Persian society recognized marriage as a sanctified bond protected by religious law, but more importantly, royal marriages were understood through a political lens. The wedding night itself served as the moment where vows, alliances, and expectations crystallized. The consummation of the marriage symbolized more than a union. It symbolized the sealing of political loyalty. Failure to consummate meant failure to cement an alliance, a humiliation for the groom, a burden to the bride, and often a crisis for the court. For the princess, however, the wedding night was terrifying for reasons beyond politics. These marriages frequently involved older men who had risen through military or administrative ranks, and who now commanded lands, armies, and wealth. Their authority, experience, and ambitions created an intimidating atmosphere for a young bride raised in the protected isolation of the royal women's quarters. Persian princesses were educated in etiquette, religion, embroidery, poetry, and statecraft, yet they were rarely prepared for the physical and emotional demands of marriage. They lived secluded lives, shielded from men outside the royal family, and taught strict codes of modesty. As a result, the first night of marriage represented an abrupt collision between innocence and the adult world of patriarchy and power. Sources from Greek historians like Herodotus, though biased, give glimpses of how fear shaped the lives of Persian princesses. Their accounts, while needing careful scrutiny, describe an atmosphere in the Persian court where royal daughters were intensely guarded, their purity and reputation watched carefully. More reliable Persian evidence from inscriptions, administrative tablets from Persepolis, and Zoroastrian cultural practices suggests that the Achaemenid elite placed extraordinary emphasis on lineage. A royal woman's first child, especially if male, could shift the balance of succession. Thus, the pressure to perform her role as a fertile and obedient wife began immediately on her wedding night. There was another layer to this fear, less discussed but deeply relevant. Ancient Persian religion and tradition considered marriage a sacred duty tied to cosmic order. According to Zoroastrian teachings, the union of husband and wife symbolized the fight against chaos, supporting the divine order overseen by Ahura Mazda. But while the spiritual purpose offered meaning, it also reinforced the obligation for the bride to fulfill her role without hesitation. For a princess, this meant that refusing or resisting the expectations of the wedding night was not only a personal defiance, but a spiritual and political transgression. Even more troubling was the uncertainty of the world she was entering. A royal bride often moved far from Persepolis or Susa to live in the estates of her husband. This meant leaving her family, her friends, her familiar rooms, and the protective embrace of palace life. Her new household could be friendly, strict, or hostile. Her husband could be gentle or cruel. She had no guarantee of safety or kindness, and no power to negotiate her role. Her perceived worth now rested solely on her ability to produce heirs and maintain the political stability her marriage represented. The young princess of 485 BC, sitting alone in her perfumed chambers, would have known all of this. She would have heard the stories whispered by senior palace women, tales of brides who cried quietly through their first nights, of brides who struggled under the weight of expectations, of brides who became powerful queens only after years of navigating the treacherous corridors of politics. She would have known that her wedding night was not a celebration of love but the first test of her new life as a political figure, and she would have known that failure was not an option. Yet despite the fear, Persian royal women were not powerless. Over time, many grew into formidable figures who influenced policy, diplomacy, and even succession struggles. Some became trusted advisors to kings. Others wielded influence behind the scenes, using their intelligence and connections to shape the future of the empire. But on the night before their marriages, none of this potential mattered. The political weight of the Achaemenid world fell upon their shoulders in its heaviest form. Their wedding nights were feared because they represented the moment when they ceased to be daughters of the king and became instruments of empire. It was a transformation marked not by ceremony but by vulnerability. And in the silent chambers of the Persian palace, beneath golden reliefs and flickering torchlight, princesses waited, prayed, and feared the night that would define their destinies. By the time the sun rose over Persepolis the morning after a royal wedding, the political value of the princess had already shifted from symbolic to strategic. In the Achaemenid Empire, where kings ruled territories reaching from Egypt to the banks of the Indus, royal marriages were not private affairs but mechanisms of power. To understand why Persian princesses feared their wedding nights, one must understand the vast political machine their marriages served. In a world where alliances were fragile and rebellion always a possibility, Persian kings treated their daughters as the most precious bargaining chips in imperial diplomacy, and once a princess crossed the threshold of her new home, she became more than a bride, she became a living guarantee. The structure of the Persian Empire explains much of this pressure. Darius I had reorganized the empire into 23 satrapies, each governed by a satrap whose authority over local taxation, justice, and administration made him almost a king in his own province. While the great king in Persepolis held supreme authority, distance and cultural diversity made local loyalties unpredictable. The sons and brothers of earlier kings had rebelled more than once, and foreign tribes allied with Persia shifted their loyalties when convenient. In such a landscape, the marriage of a princess served as one of the most effective tools to anchor loyalty. A satrap married to a royal daughter enjoyed prestige and a direct connection to the Achaemenid bloodline, but this honor came with an unspoken threat. If he rebelled, his wife's fate remained in the hands of the king. Thus, the princess became both bridge and hostage. This dual identity placed immense psychological strain on royal daughters. Their marriages were not driven by affection or preference, but by the geopolitical needs of the moment. When a province showed signs of instability or when rival elites competed for influence, a royal marriage could stabilize the region instantly. Conversely, a marriage could be used to reward a loyal general whose victories had expanded Persian borders. Her life, therefore, was dictated by the shifting currents of diplomacy. The wedding night was merely the beginning of a lifelong role in which her survival depended on the political loyalty of her husband. Greek writers, especially Herodotus, often exaggerated or misinterpreted Persian customs. Yet even through their distortions, one can trace a pattern of political marriages shaping broader imperial decisions. One notable example is the marriage of Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus the Great. Her marriages to Cambyses Roman II and later Darius I reflect how royal women became pivotal in legitimizing new rulers. Greek accounts emphasize Atossa's influence on Xerxes, suggesting she had the power to sway imperial campaigns. Whether or not these accounts are fully accurate, the consistent mention of Persian royal women in political narratives shows their centrality in sustaining or challenging the throne. But even the most powerful princesses only reached that influence after years of surviving the dangerous world into which they were married. Before they became advisors or queens, they were anxious brides facing unknown futures on their wedding nights. The political system extended beyond Persia's borders. When the empire expanded into Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt, foreign princes and nobles entered the imperial network. Marriages between Persian princesses and local rulers helped merge these diverse cultures into a cohesive administrative system. But the fear for the bride increased when the groom belonged to a different culture or religion. At times, she was sent to lands where she did not know the language, customs, or traditions. She had to learn new etiquette quickly because any mistake could be interpreted as disrespect. The wedding night, therefore, marked the start of a new identity in a foreign environment. The anxiety was amplified by the knowledge that her behavior reflected on the empire. Persian royal households valued honor above all else. A princess who appeared reluctant, fearful, or resistant risked being labeled unsuitable. Even worse, her hesitation could be interpreted politically by her new in-laws, who might assume she disapproved of the alliance. A single moment of emotional honesty could shape a decade of political relations. Thus, Persian princesses were trained from childhood to mask fear with obedience, silence, and perfect composure. But on their wedding nights, those masks often cracked. Another source of fear came from the internal politics of the households they married into. A royal daughter entered not a peaceful domestic environment but a competitive political arena. The households of satraps and high nobles were filled with wives, concubines, rival heirs, and ambitious family factions. A princess who arrived with royal prestige immediately threatened established hierarchies. Some households resented her presence. Others feared that her influence would overshadow local traditions, and women already in the household often viewed her as competition. Her wedding night was the first moment she entered this complex world, and she knew that every gesture would be interpreted by watching eyes. Persian culture placed immense importance on maintaining honor and harmony within the household, but despite formal protections, the reality was often dangerous. If a royal bride failed to conceive quickly, her position weakened. If she bore only daughters, rival wives or concubines might gain advantage. If she appeared too independent, she could be accused of influencing her husband against the wishes of the king. If she appeared too submissive, she risked losing authority inside her household. She was expected to be everything at once: dignified, fertile, politically useful, and utterly loyal. The pressure to conceive as soon as possible intensified the fear surrounding the wedding night. Fertility was not just a personal matter, it was a national duty. First night represented the beginning of the royal daughter's obligation to continue the bloodlines that supported the empire. A bride who did not become pregnant soon after marriage faced judgment from both sides of her new and old families. Her worth, once defined by her birth, now depended on her ability to produce an heir. The biological fear of childbirth added yet another layer. Ancient sources and archaeological evidence indicate that maternal mortality rates were high across the ancient world. Even queens and princesses, despite superior living conditions, faced significant risks. Every royal woman knew stories of mothers who died in childbirth or from complications after difficult pregnancies. Thus, the wedding night foreshadowed not just the fear of a new husband, but the looming reality of potential death in childbirth. Yet for all this fear, Persian princesses also carried with them a sense of resilience. They were educated in negotiation, diplomacy, and courtly behavior. They were taught religious hymns, royal protocol, and the history of their empire. By the time they married, they understood their lineage traced back to kings who commanded the loyalty of millions. Their fear came not from weakness but from knowledge. They understood the stakes of their marriage better than anyone else. They knew that their actions could preserve or destabilize entire regions. And they knew that whatever happened on their wedding night, they must emerge ready to navigate the intricate world of Persian politics. Ultimately, the wedding night was feared because it marked the end of their identity as daughters of the empire and the beginning of their role as guardians of alliances. The fear was not about the ceremony or even the husband alone. It was the fear of being thrust into a complex political ecosystem where their survival depended on navigating expectations, appeasing factions, producing heirs, and representing the empire with flawless dignity. It was fear shaped by centuries of political tradition and cultural expectations, a fear inherited by every royal daughter who walked the palace corridors before them. If the wedding night was the moment Persian princesses feared most, the life that followed often proved even more complex. While the ceremony symbolized the beginning of their role in the imperial system, the true test started the morning after, when they awoke not in the safety of the royal palace at Persepolis or Susa, but inside the intricate web of their husband's household. The Achaemenid Empire, though far more progressive in women's rights than many neighboring civilizations, still placed royal women within a carefully controlled social structure, and none of these structures were more misunderstood by later historians than the royal harem. The word harem often brings to mind Orientalist images painted by later European writers, but the reality inside Achaemenid Persia was rooted in politics, hierarchy, and calculated strategy. The harem was not merely a residence for wives and concubines. It was a political institution, a miniature court, and a sanctuary of both protection and danger. Once a princess married, she entered a world in which women possessed their own networks of influence, rivalries, alliances, and ambitions. This hidden world shaped every moment of her life. Unlike common women who lived freely and participated in the economic life of their communities, royal women lived within protected enclosures guarded by elite soldiers. These guards, often eunuchs, held significant administrative power. They controlled access between the women and the outside world. A royal daughter, now a wife, depended on these intermediaries for communication, protection, and political maneuvering. While this system protected her from external threats, it also meant that she had limited movement and constant surveillance. For a young princess raised in expansive palaces with gardens, tutors, and attendants, the sudden transition into confined quarters felt suffocating. Inside the harem, hierarchy determined everything. At the top stood the principal wife, often a royal princess herself. Below her were secondary wives, concubines, attendants, and servants, many of whom were foreign women given as tribute or taken during military campaigns. A new princess entering this system threatened the existing order. Other wives feared losing influence. Servants feared losing their positions, and rivals feared losing their proximity to power. The princess quickly learned that the harem was not a peaceful domestic space, but a battlefield of subtle conflicts. Historical evidence from Persepolis tablets and Elamite administrative records shows that royal women managed estates, laborers, and distribution of goods. This indicates that women inside the harem wielded real power, not just symbolic status. But with power came competition. A princess who hoped to survive needed to establish alliances. She had to gain the loyalty of attendants, form trust with her husband's closest advisors, and maintain favor with the king who had arranged her marriage. Her greatest threat came from within the harem itself. Rival wives might attempt to undermine her by spreading rumors, questioning her loyalty, or interfering with her ability to conceive. Because succession in ancient Persia often depended on the status of the mother, every pregnancy became a political weapon. A princess who produced a son gained immense influence. A princess who failed faced isolation and possible disgrace. Thus, pregnancy was both a hope and a fear. The knowledge that her survival and status depended on her fertility added constant pressure. The princess also had to navigate the expectations of her husband. Some men treated their royal wives as partners in governance, respecting their intelligence and education. Others treated them as political possessions, valuable only for the alliances they represented. A princess did not know which fate awaited her until she lived it. And even if her husband respected her, his extended family might not. Brothers, mothers, and previous wives all had their own ambitions. Every step the princess took affected the balance of household power. What made this world even more dangerous were the political stakes associated with disloyalty. If a satrap failed to govern properly or was suspected of rebellion, the king might punish him. In such cases, the royal wife became vulnerable. Her fate depended on whether the king believed she had conspired with her husband. At times, Persian kings protected their daughters fiercely. At other times, political necessity outweighed paternal affection. A princess might be recalled to the royal court or forced to remain as a symbolic hostage. She lived under constant uncertainty, yet despite these dangers, royal women adapted and often excelled. It is here that the deeper story emerges. Persian princesses were not passive victims. They were educated, literate in multiple languages, skilled in diplomacy, deeply religious, and trained from childhood to understand the subtleties of court politics. When they entered the harem of a governor or noble, they brought with them cultural authority, personal attendance, and the immense prestige of Achaemenid blood. Their presence alone could elevate the status of a household. Historical examples demonstrate how influential Persian royal women could become. Atassa, daughter of Cyrus, eventually became the mother of Xerxes and wielded extraordinary influence. Parysatis, the mother of Artaxerxes Roman II, was arguably one of the most powerful women of antiquity, known for navigating palace politics with ruthless skill. Amstress, wife of Xerxes, manipulated political alliances to secure the future of her children. These women did not simply survive the harem system, they mastered it, turning their marriages into sources of authority. But their power came only after years of adapting to the very environment that once terrified them on their wedding nights. Another dimension of fear came from cultural expectations. Persian ideology, shaped by Zoroastrian ethics, emphasized purity, loyalty, and upholding cosmic order. A royal wife was expected to embody these virtues. Her behavior represented not only her personal honor but the moral values of the empire. Failing in modesty, propriety, or discipline could damage her reputation and weaken her influence. Thus, even within the private environment of the harem, she lived under constant pressure to maintain perfection. Despite the extensive regulations, royal women did find moments of freedom. Gardens within the harem allowed them to walk, pray, or host intimate gatherings. They engaged in weaving, reading, and supervising the education of their children. They maintained correspondence with their families, though filtered through guards. They participated in religious festivals, offering prayers to Ahura Mazda and honoring royal ancestors. Even within confinement, they built lives filled with meaning and identity, but the underlying fear never fully disappeared. The harem was a world built on hierarchy, silence, and observation. A misplaced word, a poorly timed alliance, or a failure to conceive could determine her destiny. Every decision carried consequences. Every relationship required careful balance. Every day demanded vigilance. Thus, the fear experienced on the wedding night did not end when the sun rose. It evolved. It deepened. It became part of the daily life of a princess navigating a hidden political universe dominated by women yet controlled from outside by powerful men. Yet, it was within this world that Persian princesses also forged their greatest influence. They learned to understand power beyond the battlefield, diplomacy beyond treaties, and strategy beyond armies. In the quiet chambers of the harem, they shaped the minds of future kings, guided the decisions of satraps, and preserved the legacy of an empire that dominated the ancient world for centuries. As the centuries passed and the Achaemenid kings continued to expand their dominion across the ancient world, the legacy of Persia became synonymous with grandeur, administrative genius, religious tolerance, and breathtaking architecture. Yet behind the monumental reliefs of Persepolis and the golden inscriptions proclaiming the greatness of kings lay a more intimate story, carried in the quiet steps of royal daughters whose lives were shaped by fear, duty, and sacrifice. Their wedding nights, dreaded since childhood, marked the beginning of lives defined not by personal dreams but by the demands of empire. To understand why Persian princesses feared that night, one must understand the full weight of what they represented. They were daughters of kings, symbols of legitimacy, instruments of diplomacy, and guardians of lineage, and their fear, though hidden behind royal dignity, became a thread that ran through the heart of imperial history. After entering the harem or household of their husbands, the rest of their lives unfolded within the complex fabric of Persian political culture. But what made their fear so historically significant was not the night itself, but the consequences that followed. Their children would grow up to shape future events. Their alliances would influence the stability of provinces. Their loyalty could determine the fate of rebellions. Their influence within households could uplift or ruin families. And their very survival was tied to the ever-shifting landscape of court politics. This is why royal women mattered. This is why the story of their fear is not merely emotional history but political history. A princess who successfully navigated the early years of her marriage often grew into a respected figure known for wisdom, negotiation, and religious devotion. Yet the pressures remained constant. The birth of a son could elevate her, but his failure could endanger her. The birth of daughters strengthened ties within the household, but did little to secure her long-term status. Her relationship with her husband, once uncertain, became a key factor in her influence. If he trusted her, she could participate in decisions affecting the province or military campaigns. If he distanced himself, she became vulnerable to rivals. Thus, her entire future depended not on personal abilities alone, but on the delicate balance of familial alliances. Political crises produced the greatest danger. When satraps rebelled, when rival families competed for influence, or when succession disputes erupted, royal women often found themselves at the center of these storms. A widow might be recalled to the royal court. A loyal wife might become a channel of negotiation. A princess whose husband plotted against the king risked losing everything. The king might protect her, or he might see her as a potential threat. Such moments tested the inner strength of royal women more than any ritual or ceremony. They learned to read the shifting tides of power. They learned when to remain silent, when to intervene, and when to protect their children from political predators. The fear of the wedding night, therefore, evolved into the fear of unpredictable futures. A princess lived with the knowledge that her life was not entirely her own. She represented the empire every day. Her behavior reflected the moral standards of royal authority. Her loyalty shaped the perception of her husband's rule. Her dignity served as a symbol of the discipline and harmony that the Achaemenids believed upheld the cosmos. Thus, her personal struggles were inseparable from the ideological framework of the empire itself. Even as she gained influence, she never forgot the vulnerability she felt on her wedding night. That fear lived on as a memory, a reminder of how easily her world could change. She saw new brides arrive, trembling just as she once did. She witnessed their first nights, their anxieties, their tears hidden behind palace curtains. She recognized the same questions she once asked. Will my husband be kind? Will I conceive? Will I be accepted? Will I survive? She watched them navigate the same labyrinth of alliances, rivalries, and expectations, and she understood that this cycle would continue as long as the empire existed. What makes this story significant to world history is not simply the emotional dimension, but what it reveals about ancient power structures. The Persian Empire was one of the most advanced civilizations of its time. It pioneered administrative systems, respected diverse cultures, built monumental cities, and maintained road networks that rivaled those of later Rome. Yet even in such a sophisticated society, royal women were bound by social expectations that dictated their most intimate experiences. The empire needed them, but it also controlled them. Their fear was the byproduct of a system that balanced political necessity with personal sacrifice. Understanding this dynamic offers deeper insight into how empires function. Royal women across many ancient civilizations faced similar expectations, but the Persian example stands out because of its scale and complexity. The Achaemenids did not simply marry royal daughters for symbolic purposes. They strategically embedded them across the empire, integrating them into the machinery of governance. Their children created bloodlines that tied satrapies to the royal court. Their marriages reinforced treaties and alliances. Their loyalty provided stability, and their influence, often unseen by historians, shaped events at the highest levels, yet their personal experiences remained largely hidden. Greek historians, who left the most detailed outside accounts, often misunderstood Persian customs or interpreted them through biased perspectives. Persian inscriptions, carved in stone, celebrated kings rather than queens. Administrative tablets recorded rations, estates, and work assignments, offering glimpses but not full narratives. Thus, reconstructing the lives of Persian princesses requires blending archaeological evidence, comparative studies, ancient texts, and cultural analysis. When these sources are woven together, a clearer picture emerges, one of dignity under pressure, one of silent resilience, one of fear transformed into power, and one of women whose stories deserve to be remembered alongside the kings they served. By the end of her life, a princess who once trembled on her wedding night often became the matriarch of a powerful lineage. Her children carried forward the prestige of Achaemenid blood. Her influence shaped the values of future leaders. Her resilience served as an example to younger women. Her story, though not carved on palace walls, became part of the living memory of her family and community. Yet the fear she experienced never vanished from the collective experience of royal women. It was passed down through whispered conversations, hidden moments, and late-night confessions. It became part of the unwritten history of the empire. Ultimately, the question why Persian princesses feared their wedding night reveals the deeper truth about ancient Persia. It was an empire of extraordinary beauty and sophistication, yet one built on rigid expectations and political necessity. The night that frightened them was not merely a private moment. It was the threshold between childhood and the world of imperial politics. It was the moment when personal identity surrendered to dynastic duty. It was the beginning of a life shaped by forces far beyond their control. And yet, these women endured, they adapted, they influenced. They shaped history in ways that official records only hint at. Their fear did not diminish their strength, it forged it.